So shall Andrew go live?
Please.
Okay. Go
Spotlight
ahead.
Todd first. Spotlight Todd first.
I did already.
Yeah, Greg, I'm still seeing your icon, but I'll go ahead and go live. You guys can figure it out.
Yeah, it's fine.
We're live.
It didn't. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to wait a couple minutes for folks to come on, and we'll get started. Okay, we'll wait one more minute and we'll start, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Todd Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy, and I'll be your host today. Thank you all for joining us to discuss the most important organizing challenge humanity has ever faced: how to unite in common cause, to join as one humanity to protect our sacred planet. In the first session, we had a great gathering of elected officials and other leaders who endorsed the idea of a collective comprehensive bill while also focusing us on more immediate goals. The upshot was an enthusiastic invitation for massive outside pressure, and that's where we come in. In this session two, we welcome a wonderful array of leaders from flagship organizations to discuss the federal climate legislative strategy in the United States. With these experts, we'll go deep into the current strategies and internal organizing structures of the climate movement. And speaking with the panelists in advance, I got very excited about the receptiveness to exploring new ideas, strategies, and infrastructure. So it's not just a preliminary talk anymore. We're into the conversation, which is a blessing already. Today, you'll hear about 5 organizing tables that exist now, and we'll explore the idea of writing and filing a comprehensive bill together. We'll hear from MIT and Drawdown about how scientists can help us calculate the projected greenhouse gas reduction impacts of proposed legislation. perhaps by creating a scientific advisory committee for this that can also monitor the progress in real time so we know if something's working. We'll also talk about coalition building and infrastructure, like the healthcare and immigration movements, to combine our power and unleash the thousands of groups and millions of activists ready to sacrifice everything to save ourselves, our children's future, and all of the natural world. The immigration bill is the first priority for President Biden, and that's no accident. A nationwide network led by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the ACLU, and state-level coalitions like the New York Immigration Coalition, which has 200 members and a 36-person staff, just for that coalition, is making this happen with amnesty for 10 million people. It makes my mouth water just thinking about it. I was in that battle for comprehensive immigration reform under Obama, and it was a revelation of organizing infrastructure. And the earth can have that same and bigger. So welcome all as we could create a plan for unity that will make the scientific solutions politically mandatory by changing the political reality from the outside until we are confident and clear that a new trajectory has been forged for our home, the incredible, miraculous planet Earth. From which all of us and all of nature is born and nourished with abundance, but now threatened by the greed of a few. Now is time for humanity to protect Mother Earth from corporations. The challenge is not the opposition or science, it is internal among us, among organizations and activists. If we can unite, everything else is possible. When it comes to strategy, the debate often centers on political pragmatism and an assessment of what's possible if we're counting the votes in the moment without an outside strategy. It also ends up often being an eternal compromise before bills even get written or the fights begin. I believe we must write and file a comprehensive gold standard bill to use as a rallying cry for the masses. And by doing so, we will set the goalpost for the dream, the aspiration that will ignite the most passionate activists I've ever met, other than the ACT UP fighters who are in this movement now too and Rise and Resist. Come to session 6 to meet them. There's, of course, also incremental change we can advance sooner, and that is great, especially given the timeline we're up against. And once we have a big vision, we can then identify the piecemeal parts that can move faster and check those off the list. But by having both the big picture to mobilize the grassroots and individual bills in motion, we are no longer creating a strategic conflict between these approaches, but rather a synergy that creates unimaginable possibilities. We're not starting from scratch on the policy front by any means, as everyone knows. The policy digest on our website is a collection of over 150 expert reports and bills and laws organized under the greenhouse gas categories of Project Drawdown. And this shows the lay of the land on policy, what all the experts and all the movement activists want. And that was designed for us to see the common ground. And there are many good bills recently filed on various parts of the puzzle: fracking, plastics, hydrofluorocarbons, regenerative farming, ending fossil fuel subsidies, pesticides, and new ones in the works to ban banks from financing new fossil fuel projects, to outlaw importing products from illegally deforested lands globally, which is my favorite because I want to save the habitat for the orangutans. And of course, the Amazon. There's a Justice for Black Farmers bill and an Environmental Justice for All Act. And we heard about several others this morning from various representatives and congresspeople. In our project, we put those together in a package and began the process of uniting advocacy groups within congressional districts to lobby for those. And this is just a beta example of what could happen with a comprehensive bill or a compilation of bills led from the top to unite all the passions of the interest groups. And that would then start to build the level of power required to win. The other key question in movement and legislative strategy often is who is leading the charge? In my experience, we should not wait for Congress to write and lead on bills. Civil society should identify the solutions and lead this effort, just like the corporations do. We did this in the gay rights movement with the Equality Act. And another issue that comes up is whether a bill can pass right away, to which I say, we never filed a bill we thought we could pass for decades in our community. So we don't think about it as find the bills you can pass. We think about it as find the bills that have the outcome that you want. And in this case, need scientifically. Then you organize around those and build your power and then start counting the votes. The negotiations with Congress at the end of that journey will be very different than they appear today. And ultimately, Congress will make the tough decisions. We don't have to resolve every policy debate among ourselves. We can have different camps lobbying their passions while all still working together on the big picture, and that's fine. Imagine if all of our groups lobbied the same day, if all of our social media had the same message and call to action, if all of our legislative directors and organizers were working as a team to divvy up the 435 congressional districts and build mini coalitions in each one to go after those votes. I understand this is already done at this level for GOTV in the election cycles. Just imagine a world of possibilities because we have the capacity to do this. All we need is a plan and a clear demand or set of demands. Last point I'll make is about transparency, which is one of the underlying intentions of this symposium. Transparency is not just a nice idea. To me, it's a path to unity on a massive scale if it's properly managed. Too often political strategy is treated as a big insider secret, like big palace intrigue where knowledge about insider plans is personal or organizational power. But that is not the same as having real political power. And I've never seen a secret bill pass Congress unless it was from big oil. So today, let's lay it all out so the people can join the fight to save our shared home. As civil society, we're in a fiduciary role, representing these causes on behalf of the people. And I believe it's our role to ensure an open flow of information and engagement that keeps it clear that our power and responsibilities flow from and are accountable to the people. And by doing so, we'll enlist a power base that will overwhelm the opposition and put us in the driver's seat of destiny. Welcome again, and thank you all for coming. I'm so happy you're here, and it's an honor to be with you. So we'll get started now with our illustrious panel. The first round will open a question, and then we'll have 5 minutes from each presenter, and then we'll go in round robin style after that. The opening question is, what is the National Climate Legislative Strategy? And how is civil society organized to collectively achieve results? So first up, we have Janet Rodman from Greenpeace. And Janet and I met just the other day and had a wonderful conversation. And she was telling me all about the internal structure of the 5 tables and things like this. So Janet, welcome and thank you so much for being here. We're excited to hear what you have to say. And I'm just grateful that you can share your wisdom with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks, Todd, for the invitation to be here. And thanks for all the folks who are doing the tech behind the scenes. I know pulling off something like this with lots of speakers and lots of people is no small task. And thanks to everyone who's joined us out there in the virtual audience. It's really a pleasure to be here. So my name is Janet Redman. I'm the Climate Campaign Director at Greenpeace US. And this is an exciting conversation to me because there's no more important time to start on talking about climate solutions, advancing climate solutions than right now. And we're just in an exciting moment of opening. So the way that I'm approaching this is really from Greenpeace's mission, which is to use peaceful protests, to use creative communications, to use our 3 million member base to both expose environmental problems and the institutions and actors behind those problems, and to advance solutions that get us to a more green, just, and peaceful world. And really our priority right now as an organization, both here in the US and actually globally, is to win climate action at the scale and at the speed that the science demands, but also that justice demands. So I think just in context, just about 30 seconds of context, the world that we see ourselves in right now, as we all know, is one that we've never seen before. We've got a public health crisis, an economic crisis, a racial justice crisis, a racial justice reckoning, and it's all wrapped in the container of an even bigger climate crisis that we're moving through. And like all moments of mass disruption, this actually offers us an incredible opportunity, in my mind, to totally reject business as usual and avoid locking ourselves into the kind of fossil fuel driven climate chaos that I think we've been at risk of in past attempts at comprehensive climate bills. We really have the opportunity right now to make a huge, huge investment that's a down payment in building the sustainable future we want. So I see this as a really unprecedented opening to normalize the demand for checking fossil fuels and their phase out and transitioning our economy in a way that leaves no worker or community behind, and really investing in a Green New Deal that rebuilds a just economy and undermines the political and cultural power of our opponents. So I will not pretend to have the strategy, but I was reflecting on 3 key elements that I think are actually really connected to one another. And one, I think, really starts off with connecting with this moment and really going big. One of the pieces that I think is in the front of everyone's mind is that we need to operationalize how we embody the idea of building back better, right? We don't want to go back to normal at this point because normal is kind of what got us into this mess in the first place. And for a lot of people, going back to normal meant being on the brink of starvation, having to work 2 jobs to keep a house over your head. So I think right now, one of the key elements of our strategy needs to be connecting with the disruptive moment we're in, and embracing the just recovery agenda as part of our own agenda, and infusing that recovery agenda with what we want on climate action. So that really means centering on health and well-being of communities, as well as living within planetary boundaries, and really seeking equity and justice across both racial, geographic communities, but also communities within the labor movement. I don't think right now we're going to get the comprehensive climate package of our dreams in this Congress, but I think you're right that it means we need to be then extra bold, start setting up the markers for how we then change the political landscape so we can get our boldest agenda. The second piece is really, in my mind, about organizing around mutual benefit and shared interest. And it's a thing that I think we're doing better as a climate movement, as an environmental movement, but I think we need to actually be much more embedded and much more arms open with other movement forces that we know we need to be able to win what we want. And that includes really moving in solidarity and moving in tighter lockstep with the racial justice movement. I think we're going to see some really exciting pieces of policy coming from Movement for Black Lives around what a red, black, and green New Deal could look like that addresses both job creation, investment in Black and Brown Indigenous communities, and making sure we're solving the climate crisis. And in the same way, really embracing the labor movement to identify where are the spaces where we can find win-wins. Like I think of things like oil well remediation, job creation, where we're building, we have new jobs in places where oil workers live, cleaning up a toxic mess that's poisoning their communities and their families. Thank you for the note. And then third, I think the big element is that we need to match the power of our opposition. We are up against the biggest industries on the planet, the fossil fuel industry, ag, big timber, petrochemical association, and they're not just, they don't just want to keep polluting our air, land, and water. They're actually going after a democracy so they can lock in their rigging of the rules. We've got a bunch of tables. We could talk more about those 5 tables and where there are pockets of, I think, really exciting intersectional policy bubbling up. So we need that, but we also then need to be practicing growing our political independent power in the way you talk about. And I think that so that we're speaking to people's experiences and meeting them where they are. And that means really experimenting with the distributed organizing tools we've traditionally used for Get Out the Vote and bringing them into our issue campaigning to understand how we actually put a lot of the power back into our membership's hands as we grow that power, so that we are seeing forces coming from the grassroots up. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful, Janet. It's very exciting to get us started with that framing. I appreciate it very much. Next, we have Emily Southard, who is now the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at 350. Welcome, Emily. It was a joy to talk with you the other day, and I'm excited to hear everything you have to say, and for you to definitely touch on the, and it doesn't have to be in your opening remarks, but maybe later, of the organizing that you're aware of that took place during the Medicaid healthcare fight.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Todd. And I just echo what Janet said to everyone that's supporting this event and also watching. So my name is Emily Southard. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and that's Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne land. And I'm part of 350.org. So 350.org, just to give a little backgrounder. is a global organization and an international movement of ordinary people like all of us that are working to end the age of fossil fuels and really build a world of community-led renewable energy for all of us. And we globally really see, we have three main priorities. We want a just transition to 100% renewable energy. We want no new fossil fuel projects anywhere. We want to keep it in the ground. And we want not a single penny more to go to fossil fuel projects or the industry. So I think Janet, just to say, named a lot, I think, of where 350 is as well. Where both of our organizations, I think, are generally very aligned. And I just want to highlight a couple of things, whether it be the just recovery, standing in solidarity with movements, especially Black Lives Matter, and making sure that we are building the power across our movements to actually take on the fossil fuel industry and win. And so I'm going to take us a little on a different direction, because I think Janet made a lot of great points, which is, I think what we can't do is already start compromising. What we really need to do is start with where the science is and make sure that we are demanding for just and equitable solutions that meet the crisis at this moment, and not just what's politically possible or politically feasible. And I just want to give one example that's really exciting that came out today, which is, if you've been following this, it was over a decade ago that the divestment movement began, and 350.org was one of the founding organizations in the US around that work, inspired by the work in the Global South and in South Africa around apartheid. And at that time, we had no idea, what was possible. However, just today, the New York State Comptroller announced that they are going to do a scaled divestment out of fossil fuels for the New York State Pension Fund. So that's moving $226 billion out of oil and gas, and the goal is to have that happen by 2040. And so, and the divestment will happen in the next 4 years. And achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2040 will be a big part of it as it relates to the Paris Agreement. So that's huge. And if we had started from the place of what's politically possible, that campaign would have never, ever begun. Instead, we're at a place where, just a handful of years ago, Exxon was the largest and most profitable corporation in the world, and now they're being taken off the S&P index. And so that's where we have to start. We have to start with a vision of what is required for our mutual survival to protect Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And that's what we need to demand of our politicians, and work backwards from a strategy there. So I agree with what Janet said in that, a comprehensive climate justice bill at this stage seems a little politically fraught at the moment. And we also need to be demanding what we require, and not what Congress is already beginning, and what those in the Democratic Party might already be beginning to moderate a bit. A couple other points I'd like to make are, we know a UN report just came out this week that says that we need to scale back fossil fuel production by 6% every year for the next decade. And instead, right now, we're seeing Indigenous sovereignty being violated in Minnesota as Line 3 has begun construction. And we're seeing Arctic leasing, the Trump administration pushing for Arctic leasing. And, as a wealthy nation, the United States really has a responsibility, because we are the #1 polluter of climate emissions and CO2 in the world's history. And so as folks in the global north, we have to take responsibility for financing all of the climate projects and fossil fuel projects that are happening in the global south, and violating Indigenous sovereignty in our own country and elsewhere. So those are just some top lines I'd wanted to share. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you so much, Emily. It's wonderful. So we're going to keep going. And then I just want to put everyone, ask everyone to be thinking for your next round of comments about going deep into the strategy, how we're going to unite, what are the logistical infrastructure issues within the movement. Because we have a lot of experts on this call and a lot of experts out in the audience. And we sort of know these big picture concepts. What we don't know is what our plan is and how we're going to come together around comprehensive bills and what bills are filed now and how we maybe could unite around those bills. So we're really trying to get into the nitty gritty today. Next up, we have John Fernandez, Director of the Environmental Solutions Initiative at MIT. And John and I had a conversation that made my hope go through the roof about the prospects of the scientific community putting together an advisory committee to do projections of greenhouse gas reductions for the various policy proposals and how that might give us a scientific frame of reference for at least the gold standard bills. And then also the incremental bills, what are they going to accomplish on that front? But I'm sure he has other remarks to share as well. John, welcome. It's great to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Very nice to be with you. I'm optimistic and hopeful because I'm talk to people like all of you. So very nice to be with you, and very good to have the people participating in this session. So I'm going to take a slightly different tack from your description, Todd, but I think I am circling back to what you described. I actually want to contribute a little bit to this discussion about the need for focusing on a very specific element of legislation and connected to the science. And that is that in the past 4 years, we've really had some extraordinary momentum built up through the good works of subnational actors, because the federal government has been absent. What we need, one of the elements that we need to maintain and really to accelerate is that momentum in the way that subnational actors have taken up the mantle as best they can. And subnational, okay, that's jargon for cities and communities, civil society, and a very diverse array of actors. It's super important that we have a national strategy, and this goes to your question, Todd, about what constitutes a unified strategy. It's super important that a unified strategy includes very intimately includes the needs and the contributions of subnational actors. And so there needs to be a collaborative, iterative, and responsive way in which to ensure that local concerns and knowledge are incorporated into action plans. One of the reasons I say that is we are not only in the midst of the grand challenge of mitigating carbon emissions, but we're in the midst of dealing with adaptation, and adaptation is local. And the last point I want to make on just to set the stage is that along with engaging with and listening to subnational actors, it's a two-way street. The resources have to flow to those subnational actors from the federal government, because the scale of the effort in many ways, and I'll give a couple of examples, is beyond the resources available, certainly at the town level, the city level, the county level, the state, and often at the state level. So there's a real need to structure a national strategy with a deep understanding of the array of contributions and also the needs that subnational actors can bring to this. And this is and included within that are the vast arrays in which we need to account for our carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Generally, as many of you know, as all of you on the panel know, and many of the attendees I'm sure know, the local dysfunctions of the storage of methane across the country has been a real tragedy in the last few years. And these are local operations. They're happening at the city level, the state level. And so the ability to monitor, literally to sense in real time and to account for those emissions, whether they're fugitive or whether they're simply released irresponsibly, is important. So a couple of things. I'm talking to you as a professor from MIT. I run a group called the Environmental Solutions Initiative. And in 1 minute, I'm going to introduce just a few projects that we're doing that are illustrative of what I just talked about. One project that we have in the works right now, we're working with several Bronx communities to co-design with them a technology platform for monitoring energy usage in buildings and primarily in public housing and in low income housing, and doing that with a whole host of technologies, the same kinds of technology that we're using to work with Afro-Latino and indigenous peoples in Latin America, primarily in Colombia. Also, another project that we're working with now, again, at the local level, we're working with the Center for Coalfield Justice in Western Pennsylvania on a just transition. The work that we've done there is to do the legwork to understand what are the economic challenges in a just transition in that context. And it's not possible for the state to contribute the resources for a just transition, and it really requires the federal government. And the last project that I'll just mention here is that it's super important for us in the academy, at universities, especially research universities, to engage our students directly in this effort. And we have a group called the Rapid Response Group that is hosting conversations directly with congressional offices now. And we have an event this Friday. It's super important for young people to get involved at various levels and at various depths in the effort to create a national strategy. So thank you. I'll leave it at that.
I need to stop unmuting or stop muting myself. Thank you so much, John. That's great. And the idea of mobilizing the students is critical. I keep asking, where are they? We hear the youth, but the students, 20-year-olds, it's their future. And so, it all comes down to a demand, for the Equality Act, the BREATHE Act, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform. The demands are the centerpiece of a movement, and the students are not going to make up the demands on their own. That's our job. So that's what we're still trying to figure out. And then calculating demands that actually have scientific backing would really give people some passion. All right, next up we have Sasha von Bismarck, the Executive Director of the Environmental Investigation Agency. Welcome, Sasha. It was a pleasure talking to you the other day, and we're excited to have you. Please go ahead.
Great. Thanks very much, Todd. Thanks for this opportunity. And I did not speak to John before, but the sort of lead-in or synergy with the comments, all the comments so far, but particularly the comments just made, are embarrassingly convenient. My organization is smaller than the others in the room. We're about 40 people here in DC and 40 in London, and work on mostly the impacts of global trade on the big environmental things we're trying to solve. And the reason I say that is that my view of the strategy will be influenced by that. We try to focus on leveraging information, particularly leveraging both the science all the way from the kind of analysis that we're talking about here, that we have in the room, the big science to make the decisions about which policy has what impact, as well as the specific, often case stories and more emotive forms of information, of stories, of truth, of interconnectedness, of truth, of culpability in what's happening, truth of the actual local impacts of what's happening. So the moments that we've had success with big legislation that have tackled the big issues, and none could be bigger than climate change, have revolved around the extraordinary power of the right kind of information at the right time to unify exceptional alliances. And for us, that's essential because we don't really have a ground game. So it's all about first of all, the other NGOs in the room, the other ones who we generally hang out with, agree on something and rally around sources of information. One example that may be illustrative that I've just been thinking about in trying to answer your question is that we had a relatively great breakthrough in trying to deal with deforestation around the world. And, we were thinking that structurally a revolution that is required in global trade is that we need demand side solutions. We have to have bad wood in this case that we are all culpable for consuming. We have to have something happen here in this country. We have to stop it basically at the border if it is destroying local lives somewhere else. So that, was a legislative push that was really thought to be way beyond possibility, because you were talking about real trade consequences. It was stuff that we weren't really allowed to touch, actually causing pain for US importers. That was sort of, it can't be done. But it was done, and it was done, I think, for two main reasons that I think are important in thinking about our strategy now. One was that we were splintered as a community on this topic at the time. This was sort of the mid-2000s, on how to stop deforestation. And that splintering was a result of entirely smart, well-meaning people tackling a really complex issue and having been, on a certain incredibly important path, and creating really deep trenches and a war that had as a consequence that if there was a political opportunity to do something big, it was not going to happen. And it didn't happen. And somehow the ability to have the right science, to focus us on a piece of the revolution, not a lowest common denominator that you can get through for the sake of getting some policy through, but to recognize what is the actual revolution, to systemically get at the issue, and to look at each other, in the face and hand on heart and say, can we agree on that part, and are we going to support each other for that revolutionary step? And then so there's the overall information. I think in this case, Drawdown is here, John for MIT is here. That is obviously foundational for that to work. The other type of information is the other thing that John was just talking about, which is the local, often immediate, often emotive for those that need to understand the issue, description of what the impacts are locally. In the case of this a question of how to tackle deforestation and global consumption, it was the voices of indigenous people in the Amazon, in the Congo, in Indonesia, that were convincing actual policymakers in the United States to say that, look, if you buy our wood, you are part of the criminal syndicate that is right in our backyard here and trampling over our rights. And for us to, thanks for the warning, for us to turn that into policy in the United States, we had to make the actual actors in the US culpable, the actual companies, that were in the right jurisdictions to get the policy through. So to end with that, I think what that means is that we're calling for we need to think about an ecosystem of information that connects that information to whoever it is in our community that is pushing forward the particular policy goal. It particularly means that we need to be connected to the grassroots sources of that information, to communities in the United States, communities around the world, that through mechanisms like John's that he was just talking about, and I was so excited because we have a similar effort to encourage citizen investigators to go to their local supermarket and take a picture of the bad refrigerant, that's in the ice cream the ice cream door, and that kind of stuff that connects the American voter and local communities to the issue, and feeds the actual information, as John was saying, that the solutions are built on. If we get that ecosystem right, and we focus on the revolution that we agree on, I don't think there's anything that we can't do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sasha. The activists in 350 NYC in New York, they were all hot to trot on hydrofluorocarbons. I didn't think I'd ever know that word. I'm sorry to say I do now, but they did a play about it, and everyone was running around taking pictures and going to their local stores. It's a fascinating thing that citizens' role in enforcement and the scientific collection it's a fun thing to do. So, because you can't lobby every day, but you always go to the grocery store. So it can be a composite. Imagine if all of our members were flooding all the grocery stores around the country to check on the hydrofluorocarbon issue. What kind of force we would have. And that's the question really is, how do we unite all of these individual campaigns into a collective vision so that we're not, individually, we are not powerful. Collectively, we could be unstoppable, and we're not there yet. So this is what this conversation is for, and I'm just excited we're on it. Chad Frischman, Chad, VP and Director of Research at Project Drawdown, is one of my guiding lights. When I first found Project Drawdown in that list, I'm like, oh, hallelujah. There's at least a list of the problems. And now we just have to come up with the solutions to match this list, right? And then we'll put all those in legislation, and then we'll fight for that. It's very simple, isn't it? But it's not, is it? And I'm aware of that. But nevertheless, this map that you gave us is the foundation. So now we got to come up with the solutions to match your greenhouse gas sources. So take it away and tell us everything you want us to know.
Well, thank you so much, Todd, and thank you for all my fellow colleagues here on the call today, and the panelists who are and the attendees who are listening in. And so to answer your question about what is the national climate strategy that we need, I think it's naming the goal that we actually want, the goal for the future, right? And I think one of the attendees, Maggie Downs, threw into the Q&A a very interesting idea, a drawdown bill. And that's what we should name this, because we really need to go beyond just the targets that we set ourselves to really visioning where we want to be in the future and moving towards that direction. But for those of you who may not have encountered drawdown in the past, let me tell you what it's all about. So drawdown is that point in time when atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases begins to actually decline on a year-to-year basis. So this is the point when we go beyond net zero, when we actually pull out carbon from the atmosphere and change the composition of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. And this can have the effect of global cooling, essentially stopping global warming and beginning the process of reversing it, right? And so what Project Drawdown is a research and communications organization that has mapped, measured, described, and modeled the most substantive solutions, technologies and practices that exist today, that are real, tangible solutions that we know work because they're scientifically valid, they're economically viable, they're already being implemented. And all we need to do is scale them, move faster to accelerate their implementation so that we can really achieve that goal for the future that we want. So it's not even a technical challenge. It's not even an economic challenge. It's a matter of will. And so what I think what we really need to be doing is changing the way we even think about our approach, climate action, and how we actually see our role in this. We need to move away from this paradigm in which we've been operating of problem fixing as a response to fear. And doing that in an environment of conflict and competition, that's not solved anything. And so for us to really have a coherent national climate policy and strategy, and a strategy for the globe, we need to change that entire paradigm. We need to move away from problem fixing and see the solutions that are right in front of us and move in that direction and see what the possibility of what those solutions can achieve in the future based on the science and the data that support that. And we need to change the environment in which we're operating from one of conflict and competition to one of collaboration. We need to see ourselves as linking arms together from top-down initiatives, which is incredibly important from policy frameworks, bottom-up initiatives, how every individual has a role to play in the solutions that they can take on themselves, but also what I like to think of as the middle out, institutional change. And that's really essential. We need top-down, bottom-up, and middle out in order to to create this goal. And when we do that, when we link arms and think about the solutions that possibly they can achieve and address them as a system of solutions in parallel, we adopt all the solutions that are relevant to achieving our, to reducing greenhouse gases, enhancing our sinks, improving society. That has the effect of allowing us to achieve drawdown and essentially solve the climate emergency. But if we do this implementation with justice, equity, and inclusion at its heart, right, we can actually shift the system itself from one of exploitation and extraction to one of restoration and regeneration. We can change to a new normal by naming the future that we want, identifying the real technologies and practices that are available right in front of us, and implementing these solutions, accelerating the implementation of these solutions in our country and helping other countries around the world to do that with justice, equity, and inclusion. And when we do this, the exciting thing about it is there's so many cascading benefits to these solutions that address many challenges. You see the Sustainable Development Pin. Sustainable Development Goals can be helped to be achieved when we implement these solutions as a system. We can help to reduce or alleviate poverty, eliminate hunger, improve or reduce inequalities, improve health outcomes, improve gender equality. This goes on, and improve, create jobs, improve economic growth in a regenerative, circular way. So when we think about all of these solutions to solve the climate emergency, I think for this country in particular, our national climate strategy should name the future that we want, solve the climate emergency, and do it in the right way so that we can fundamentally change the system and address so many of the other challenges. If we see this as not just a climate issue, but bring on climate, bring on the environment, bring on the economy, bring on security. We bring on all the facets of government together to realize that when we solve for climate, we solve for just about everything else.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you. So you see, scientists are not just scientists. They're philosophers, they're strategists. They have all sorts of things to bring to the table. But one piece that he didn't mention, and is that we want the scientists to become lobbyists as well. So once we have a comprehensive vision, the scientists are going to join with the faith leaders, are going to join with the environmental activists, and we're going to get the lawyers in the mix from the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. The potential here is huge, and the gravitas they would bring to that conversation is powerful. But between Chad and John, we have the people who can count the greenhouse gas impacts of proposed legislation too, and that might help us all have a shared focus. So I'm lobbying, obviously, to keep turning the conversation back to strategy. As you might have noticed, it's the hardest thing. People like to talk philosophy and macro visions, et cetera, and big goals. But how are we going to get there? I'm very pragmatic when it comes to this. And that's why I've convened this whole symposium, is to try to get down to the nuts and bolts of, all right, where are the organizing circles? Where's the coalition? Is it staffed? Are your communications teams linked? Are your legislative directors linked? Are your organizing teams linked? How are you vertically integrated from your policy goals to your action plans and your social media? And if so, how do we align that across all these groups so that we have, we speak with one voice and have real power? So I'm just going to keep bringing us back to that theme because I'm hoping us to get there. And it's a perfect segue for the next speaker, Kieran Suckling, Executive Director of the Center for Biological Diversity. And, my email inboxes from Center for Biological Diversity are always my happiest emails to open. They have a bill, they're fighting for the bill, they have a coalition behind the bill, plastics, you name it, they've got a lot of ideas, but they're real legislation, and they're organizing from the top to the grassroots, and more importantly, they're taking it to the public. And it's not an internal strategy, it's an internal and external. So I know I didn't get to speak with you before this, Kieran, but your team is, I love them, and I love what you're doing. I think it's the right vision. How do we make this vision bigger than just one or two bills and make it a comprehensive bill or a comprehensive package of bills? Or how do you see us really pulling this together on a bigger level?
Well, thanks for that nice introduction, Todd. I think, the first part of the strategy question is going to be, do we need a real science-based benchmark bill? And I think we do. I think it's critical that we have that. Otherwise, we're never going to get there. But also it has great utility in enabling us to understand other bills that come up on other policies and where they fall short. It's very important that we do that. And while that might seem obvious, I think there's going to be some real difficulty in unifying around just the idea of putting such a bill together. And we should not underestimate the difficulties of that and be ready to deal with them. In Joe Biden, we've got a president who is, a polite way to say it, is very moderate on climate issues. I think his natural tendency even puts him a little bit to the right of Obama, who was very much a moderate. And that's going to be a big challenge for us. We've got the liberal media, this always happens, it's quite remarkable. Yeah. The Republicans can win an election by the slimmest of margins, like 1 vote. And it's, we have a mandate, and we run, and we never look back. The Democrats can win the Electoral College, by 40 votes. And then just the slew of op-eds come out saying, how did we fuck up so badly? We should have won by 80 votes. What a disaster the election was. And now we have to come to agreement with the opposition, and there's no mandate. And just the ability of the left and the progressive media to undermine itself is just, it's unbelievable. And so, and that's going to continue forward here. I think we'll get a big signal soon in who Biden selects as Secretary of the Interior. That's going to be a critical position for all these climate issues. His choice for ag, Vilsack, not great, and shows a sort of going back to a sort of traditional Obama middle lane approach. So what we see in Interior is going to be really critical, because ultimately I think Joe's instincts are not progressive enough. However, if he has a good cabinet, they can push him further than he'd like to go. That's going to be really important. And so there will be pushback. And I think a fair amount of folks in the climate political sphere are going to be afraid to push for a strong bill. There'll be a sense of, if we push something too strong, we then embarrass Democrats who won't vote for it, or we make them more vulnerable by voting for it. Either one, you're going to start to hear this kind of thing out of the box. So, so when I think of that first question of strategy, I think we need this. And I think to get it, we're going to have a really strong grassroots coalition, multiple coalitions at very large scale to make this happen, because we're going to get there, we are going to have to push many progressives, liberals, Democrats beyond their comfort zone. You're just not going to get there in the comfort zone, no way. And this has been done elsewhere. The battle for Obamacare is a good example. Didn't get us where we needed to go, but that was a big, strong, aggressive coalition that moved everything to the left. In the work that we've been doing with legislation on plastics, other issues, particular climate bills, our focus has really been to go to the grassroots across the country from the very beginning, to bring them in, involve them in the development of the policy, the vision, because without them, it's not going to happen. And also, reaching out, beyond the usual Enviro crowd to others. The health community is really big in these issues. The movement for Black Lives, many, many other constituencies. You need them to be able to move anything other than a real insider strategy bill. And the insider strategy bill is not enough. So we've got to, I was gonna say we've got to build that quickly, but a lot of it's already there. We're not starting from zero here at all. But we need to convene it, empower it, expand it, and push it along immediately to start to develop this vision and give it enough momentum that it has to get its day in Congress and in the administration, and forcing the administration to take a stand on it. A good example of that from another perspective, is the Keep It in the Ground campaign. When that first was floated as an idea, it was rejected as being just wildly impossible. And I was shocked then how in a matter of really just a few years, that went from unthinkable to every single Democratic primary contender for president endorsed that campaign.
Yeah.
It happened very rapidly. We had the presidential candidates questioned repeatedly, where do you stand on this, by the media? So we can really advance things very rapidly that were unthinkable just a few years ago with that real grassroots support. And I think that when we're going out to, jump in, Todd?
Yeah, I was just going to, because that's that time, I think, on this one, but we're going to have many more rounds. And I never want to stop somebody who's saying something I completely love and agree with. So this was a hard one. But I'm grateful for those thoughts and remarks. And yeah, and the gay rights movement, we never filed bills that we thought we could pass. I mean, we had to start anyway. That's a story for another time. But when we decided to file the Equality Act in 2015, it was a huge battle internal of the movement. Won't happen. And it turned out that the financial power of the DNC and the gay community in funding our movement were the same players. I don't know if you know Andy Tobias. He's the chair of the DNC finance chair. And once I realized that the major donors to the Human Rights Campaign Fund and the DNC were the same, I'm like, aha, this explains the logjam. And I just lobbied Andy at every party I saw, and that sort of helped break through it. And that and Obama, and he helped too. But they were saying, we can't file a bill to add you to the civil rights laws. The Black Caucus would never allow us to open up and touch the civil rights laws. So we faced major opposition. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Cardinal Dolan, was in the New York Times. He was calling out Obama, saying, if you support marriage equality, we will unleash a holy war on you. So, if you want to accomplish big things, you can't wait for the politics to get there. You have to set those goals in motion, and then unforeseeable forces take over and manifest things that we can't imagine, and they change what's possible. So I'm lobbying you all now. I'll try not to do that too much. Next, we have Ramon Cruz, president of the Sierra Club. Ramon, thank you so much for joining us. Sierra Club, I know no one's ever heard of it, but we're still glad you're here. And we're eager to hear how the Sierra Club is one of my favorite groups, because Catherine Skopik of Sierra Club NYC was one of the lead motivations for this whole symposium. After the election, I was exhausted, everyone was exhausted. And she kept saying, no, we got to do it. No, we got to do it. And so she was the wind beneath my wings, and your network and the passion of the activists in your network is just mind boggling. And that's what I can't wait for them to have the demand to work with, so you can unleash this capacity and these, these passion that you've created on something that we could take to the doorsteps of Congress. But anyway, I'm lobbying again. Welcome, Ramon, and please take it away.
Well, thanks a lot, Todd, and for those words, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this panel. As Todd said, I'm Ramon Cruz, president of the Sierra Club. I use pronouns he, him, his, and I'm speaking to you all from the occupied territory of the Canarsie people, otherwise known as Brooklyn, New York. And Sierra Club's priority, the top priority is to build an equitable and sustainable planet for all communities. And we do that with over 3.5 million members and supporters for over 125 years, building collective power together through community-based partnerships, collecting petitions, organizing, storytelling, and building people power, strong enough to move us from the current reality into the future. So we need to continue to organize and to restore our rights to clean air, clean water, and sustainable, healthy climate. I think we also need to deal with issues of systemic racism, if we want to win this battle against climate change. Many people do not usually make this connection, but I'm convinced that we will never survive the climate crisis without ending systemic racism and systems of supremacy, in the case of the US, white supremacy. And here's why, you can't have climate change without thinking of having, certain zones that you can sacrifice, and you cannot have sacrifice zones without thinking of the people in these zones to be disposable people. And you cannot have then the notion of disposable people without an ideology of supremacy and racism. So we cannot turn, a blind eye to people suffering from the effects of the extractive industries and fossil fuel for the betterment of society. There's no such thing. So those of us, who are white need to have a real reckoning about what we are, each willing to do to show up for Black, brown friends, neighbors, and communities. We need to do the hard and slow and yet very urgent work of holding each other accountable to stamping out white supremacy in this country. Now, fixing what Trump broke will not be an easy and short task. We need to build on a rich history of change makers who came before us, who have transformed the world, and we know that it is possible, and that when we fight together, we and stand up for each other, we win. And we will be pushing to have as many of our allies in the environmental movement to be part of the Biden-Harris administration. So in the short term, we have basically 5 priorities, and I will number and explain them in the order that I think they're likely to come up legislatively, but doesn't necessarily reflect the order in which the Sierra Club will be allocating time and resources over the course of the next year. But ultimately, they're all important. So these 5, number 1 would be to fix democracy. That reduce corruption and gerrymandering, expand ways to vote, limit money in politics by creating small donor public financing, DC statehood, fix the courts, things like that. Number 2 would be to pass and adjust an equitable recovery using vehicles such as the Thrive Act, create millions of good, safe jobs with access to unions, build the power of workers to fight inequality, invest in Black, brown, and indigenous communities to build power and counteract racial and gender injustice, strengthen and heal the government-to-government relationship with sovereign native nations, ensure fairness for workers and communities affected by economic transitions, and reinvest in public institutions that enable work and communities to thrive. I can go very quickly. Was that the sound making me that I have to stop?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Maybe I am hearing or very conscious about it. But number 3, 100% clean energy for all. So no community left behind, a healthy climate and healthy air quality by phasing out coal by 2030 and gas by 2035 on the electric grids across the country, and including just and pollution-free energy economy by 2050, access to affordable energy for everyone, a healthy transportation and goods movement. I heard that. 30 seconds more. Economic diversity and community wealth building, etc. No. Number 4, very important, and something that Biden ran with, environmental justice. So there is something called the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform. So follow the lead of the EJ leaders in this platform to work with the new administration to fully address the risks from all pollution in environmental justice, community channel investments, where they are most needed, deal with cumulative impacts, etc. And finally, then lands, water, and wildlife. So protect 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. Very clear. That's including protecting the coastal plain of the Arctic refuge that Trump is trying to harm in the last month. And go on into so many other areas, expand the Every Kid Outdoors program and to include, all children and remove monuments and markers to Confederates, etc. So I'll stop there, but happy, of course, to continue this discussion in the next hour.
Thank you, Ramon. You mentioned several legislative things. The 20 by 30 bill, that's very popular. HR 1 is the democracy restoration bill. So it's great to have bills and have policy goals, but what's the game plan to mobilize the millions of supporters that we all have behind these legislative agendas? And what is our strategy to draft what's missing and all the other bills? So we'll get into that in a minute. First, we're gonna have Felice Stadler, who's the VP for Environmental Defense Fund. Welcome, Felice. It's so great to have you. And please take it away. I know we chatted. I don't have any quick, clever intro from our takeaway, but I was glad that we did, and I remember enjoying it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. So I'm going to just start and just briefly say a few things about who I am, because I think folks might think when you think of Environmental Defense Fund, it's mostly lawyers and scientists and economists, but I'm an advocate. I've been here in Washington, D.C. for nearly 25 years advocating for clean air and climate solutions. Grew up in New York City and rural Maine, had stints in Western Montana and Eastern Kansas, so have definitely had a finger on the pulse of this country. My background and passion is organizing, building coalitions to push for lasting change. And that's the lens that I bring to my remarks today, and definitely the lens I bring to the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm going to focus a little bit here on context setting. There's going to be maybe a few themes that have emerged from this great panel. And then I want to talk a little bit about how EDF is approaching 2021, and then what success looks like for the coming year from our perspective. First, in terms of context, Americans are definitely waking up that we have a climate problem. So for those of us who've been working on this issue for a long time, one might think like, well, finally there's been a realization, but our issue has reached the mainstream unlike ever before. There's more pressure on the political and financial systems to deal with it. There's more activity on Capitol Hill than there's been in over a decade. If you just look at the amount of activity that happened over the last 18 months, it's pretty phenomenal. We did not think that would be possible, but there's definitely lots of bills already out there that serve as great markers and conversation starters. It's the first time we saw climate really being an issue in the electorate. This is no accident. There was a lot of work that made that possible, and we saw that on full display. The corporate world is moving forward. So the pivot to decarbonizing our economy is happening, definitely in some sectors and regions, in some countries, in some companies, albeit slowly, but you definitely see the corporate world is moving. And then lastly, the environmental community is more united around near-term opportunities than we have had in a long while. And this is really, really important. I think it's the theme of this convergence and definitely of this panel. One very specific example of that is the Coalition for Clean Energy and Healthy Communities. It's not a very well-known coalition. It's an outgrowth of some of the work that a few of us did with the Climate Action Campaign, but there is a great website that's an example of where we really coalesced around some key policy principles. There's about, I think, 5 or 6 pillars there. So now with the elections behind us, well, sort of, and we look to January in the first 100 days of the next Congress and the administration, We do finally have an opportunity to advance progress. Progress is back in play at the federal level. We've had definitely kind of a 4-year period where we never even engaged with the administration, and that is definitely going to be very different moving forward, thank God. In particular, making progress through the executive branch like the EPA is critically important. We have a lot of ground to make up. I think my colleagues have already shared that. And we need to make sure that there's political support for pushing the policies that the incoming administration is eager to move. We can't take for granted just because we have Biden in the White House and we've got great, administration staffing up, and we've got, strong support, that everything is just kind of move along easily. We have to really stay vigilant and not take anything for granted, and vigilant about shoring up the political support for action. So what about Congress? Well, we know we can't fix the climate problem without them, and we cannot fully decarbonize our energy economy without congressional action and support. It's too big of a transition. So at EDF, I sit within government affairs. We are a team of a dozen individuals. It's a big team, but here I'm going to really focus on what our legislative team is focused on. We have about a dozen. We lobby Congress, all corners, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. So coming out of the gate, what we are doing is really focusing on what's possible through congressional spending. Now it might be a little bit of a different approach than other colleagues. But what we know right now is that Congress is going to get ready to move. And we're looking at sort of a 3-pronged focus. What can we do with creating jobs, good jobs with high labor standards, steer investments towards communities most in need, making communities safer from climate disaster and safer from pollution. All of it's possible if spending and related policies are designed with these outcomes in mind, and which is where we come in. The window of opportunity is narrow and critical. It might not be branded or labeled as climate action, but they align with our overarching goals. These are investments that are going to lead to decarbonizing our economy, but we need to really move and take advantage of those opportunities. It might be called green infrastructure or stimulus or build back better, but they're all directionally moving us where we need to be. So we're going to see it in the budget process, federal appropriations, stimulus or recovery bills, the highway reauthorization bills. They all might sound as like kind of boring and maybe not that sexy, but they are really important legislative vehicles that we need to take advantage of. It might seem small bore, but we do have a potential to make these be game changers. Why do we think that these are so important? It's because our approach is that if we actively engage here and help shape the debate and the policies, we are going to be building momentum for climate. We can engage voters and constituents in a way that's going to be really critical, so that we can take advantage of these opportunities and set up for what lies ahead, which will be bigger bites at the apple. Movements and coalitions get stronger when we achieve victories, however big or small. So our thought here is that we need to secure these wins in the near term so we continue to build the political power and organizing muscle that we need to fully tackle the climate crisis. So I can happily go into any more detail on those, but that's sort of how we're assessing the situation.
Thank you so much, Felice. My ears perked up when I heard legislative directors. If I could just get all your legislative directors in one room for a few hours, I think we might.
Well, we gather regularly, so you can join the team.
Okay. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, then I'll take that as a win already in this symposium. I'm happy to do that, and I would love to do that. All right. So this is great. So we've gone through the first round. It's about 4:13, which is a little bit later than I thought we would be. So we'll see how many more rounds we have of 2 minutes each. There's like 10 of us, so we might get 2 more rounds in. And I just need everyone's help now, because this is all beautiful and fascinating, obviously, and it's big picture, a lot of it. And I just am desperate, really, to get down to a nitty-gritty, mechanical conversation of how this movement, how all of you are interconnected. It's a mystery. Several years into studying this movement, and it's still a mystery to me what the infrastructure looks like and how you guys are coordinated, and more importantly, I get back to the legislation. All these great ideas, we have to put them in writing. And I know you all did a bill in 2008 or 9, and then it's like 12 years later and we didn't have anything to organize around. Bills are organizing tools in my life. And so, because the activists, they need something to demand. And then once you have that demand, we know what to do from there. It's mechanical. But creating that demand, whether it's, I don't care if each one of you have your own bill that you like, if we could put that all in a public facing website and say, here are the bills of the environmental community, and these groups support this bill. We've sort of done that on the digest a little bit with the bill package, but we can't do this. Obviously we can and we will, but it would be wonderful if it came from a concerted effort at the top, and a public facing website, a clear coalition that's fully staffed. I mean, that's just basic infrastructure for a movement that we still don't have. These tables that exist, I hear there are 5 different tables, and Working Families Party is driving one of those strategies, and they're drafting a bill. I hear Menendez is going to be filing a comprehensive bill. And that's great for the working families parties and groups to work with them, but political parties, in my experience, are not going to save us. And it's really civil society that has to save itself. And so I don't know how to get clearer about what I'm trying to elicit from everybody, but if you could just help us pull back the veneer, talk about the physical infrastructure and how your legislative directors are working together, who is guiding that work. I guess that's really it. I think you'll understand what I'm trying to elicit. I hope I'm not asking for state secrets here. The people think of in government and civil society and politics, everything is a big secret. And I get that. And it's like this internal dynamic where knowledge is power, right? But that doesn't translate into real political power for a movement. So this is what I'm trying to get at. I'll stop talking. Should we just go back in the same order and start with Janet? 2 minutes, everybody. Let's try to make it short and quick and focused, and then we'll have more times to go around.
Yeah, we'll jump right in. Yeah, I mean, I think you're naming a real challenge. The challenge is like the environment movement is enormous. We have a broad set of analyses about what the problems are and what the solutions are. And I think it sounds like many of us have agreed here, we need more than the climate movement and we need more than the environment movement, which adds another layer of analyses of what the root cause of the problem is and solutions are. So one thing I was excited to hear that many people mentioned, was that we need to look at job creation, which talks about bringing the labor movement and connecting with the labor movement. We talked about racial justice and public health, which makes us connect back to the immigrants' rights, the racial justice movement. But that obviously poses challenges that we need to have an even deeper, a broader table. So let me just speak to what you mentioned, these 5 tables. And I saw a question about what's a table. Think about a coalition. So a coalition of folks coming to sit around a table. The 5 tables that Todd, you mentioned include the Climate Action Campaign that you spoke about, Felice, the Green New Deal Network, which Greenpeace is a part of, and that's what the Working Families Party has been hosting that you mentioned, Todd, which is really focused on the investment side, saying if we invest in a Green New Deal, we can drive that job creation, investment in communities, particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous communities. We can drive climate solutions. And it builds a bigger tent. So they're talking about that, building the bigger tent. There's a U.S. Climate Action Network that has a vision for equitable climate ambition. Another table called the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform. And then there's a group called the Blue Green Alliance, which also has a kind of a policy for solidarity for just transition. Each of those tables is a bunch of organizations. Many of those organizations sit at multiple tables. And then within that, they each have their own platforms. What's interesting right now is I think there is what I see as important in terms of what are the demands. I think the approach will be there'll be lots of little bills, and we'll try to look at the sum of their parts and see where there are gaps and try to fill those gaps with more particular bills and see how we can nest those together. I do think that an overarching message in my mind that pairs investment in the future we need with starting the transition away from what we have to leave behind is kind of the winning package. And in my mind, that's because we're talking about then investing in jobs, investing in communities, investing in renewable energy, investing in public infrastructure, and being really clear that we have to move away from fossil fuels. We can't invest in that stuff and then continue to have an industry that undermines our democracy at every step. They're lobbying to pass bills that make it impossible for us to protest, that becomes a felony. So we need to be really clear about that. We are actually fighting some opposition, and we need to be strong about that. I hear the bell. I just want to name really clearly that there's another piece of that infrastructure that we haven't really talked about. People have mentioned it, part of that bottom-up policy, and that's, there are regional tables, regional spaces that are coming together in a bottom-up way. For example, the Gulf South Initiative for a Green New Deal, the Southeast Initiative for a Green New Deal. These are places where people are coming from, most impacted by the fossil fuel industry, most impacted by climate change, most impacted by white supremacy, and frankly, jobs fleeing the South, and are putting proposals on the table. So I think we need to take that very seriously. And it's about building, mobilizing infrastructure. So taking all that electoral stuff we did really well and applying that to this issue. Thanks.
Right, wonderful, Janet. Thank you. We're getting closer to a strategy conversation. We still interjected a little bit with policy and macro vision and these ideas. I want to talk nuts and bolts as much as we can. So there are these 5 tables. Do they have we'll keep moving, of course, but in terms of the coalitions that I'm aware of that work on federal legislative goals, they're a particular entity. They have their own staff. Like I told you, the New York Immigration Coalition is just a small piece of the massive federal infrastructure of the immigration movement. And they have 36 staff members. And they know exactly what their mission is to, and among many, but federal legislation is it. And there's a process for the policy disputes or conversations to happen through a steering committee. And there's a public interface so everyone knows what they're fighting for and how they're organized. This is like a secret shield that feels like it's still up. But let's tear it down. Go ahead, Emily, tell us, get us into the nuts and bolts. How are we going to organize the organizers? How are you all going to organize to bring a public face forward to the legislative strategy of the climate movement?
I'm feeling the pressure to answer it.
No. And I'm going to start interrupting just so y'all know.
No, I think you've identified a need. Right. We do have all of these different coalition groups and they're all focused around different things. And what is the overall umbrella that we are all fighting for? And I think that's a need that the climate movement has. And I think Janet, again, did a good job of summing up the keep it in the ground, moving away from fossil fuels and investing in our future as the 2 pieces in which that umbrella should encounter. So I think that's a need, just to name. I think it needs to happen. I think as far as strategy and as it relates to organizing strategy is we also need to invest in our movement. And I'll tell a quick story of self around this, and a little background about myself is, I worked on the 09 Waxman Markey bill and organizing in Philadelphia. And I remember going out to rallies, pushing really hard, and the energy just wasn't there compared to when we switched to working on healthcare. So I also worked on the healthcare fight. And the way that it resonated with people's lives, it was so clear. We all have healthcare horror stories or know someone that's really close to us. And the connection between the benefit in someone's life and what was happening at the federal level was so clear that the numbers that turned out and the passion and the power was there to win federal legislation. And I think that's something that the climate movement and something that 350 is investing in, which is making sure that those that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, whether it be communities that are facing fossil fuel infrastructure fights in their neighborhood, fence line communities, or pollution in their neighborhoods, or whether it be you're wildfire survivor, or your communities facing flooding regularly. I think we need to invest in telling those stories and telling the story of connecting people's lives to climate change, and that they aren't isolated events and that we're all together in this. And I think that Sasha was talking a little bit about how do we get that information and help people self-identify as people that are personally being impacted.
And Emily, that's sort of that's the second level. Once we have an infrastructure and a set of demands, how do we mobilize and inspire? But the demands themselves could do that. But Emily, before we move on, and I know the bell's ringing, can you talk about the national coalition around Medicare for All?
Yeah, so there was a group called,
Just the infrastructure, not the policy, just like how was it organized and how was it staffed?
oof, I'm not the best person to talk about how it was organized. That time I was a field organizer, so I wasn't at the national table, but it was called HCAN, which was Healthcare for America Now. And it was a very, well-funded, well-staffed, very tight-knit coalition that certainly was able to create that large umbrella. And I think there are, pluses and negatives to that style, but in the end, I think it's certainly something that the climate movement is evaluating and determining if that's, needed or if there's a different model.
Well, it's definitely needed, and the models are flexible, and there could be multiple of those. The models are, well, I'm so glad to hear that conversation's happening. Next, John, and we're going to be tightening, well, we're fine. John, please, if you could zero in a little bit on counting greenhouse gas emissions from proposed policy and how
so I'll be super quick because I think others might have more to say about the legislative challenge ahead of you. A couple things I wanted to say. One is that carbon accounting, although still in need of standardization and better federal oversight, is not the challenge here. We can reach a good rigorous standard for carbon accounting across sectors, and so the general point I want to make is that the science is not the challenge here. What I think is really the challenge is coupling a variety of priorities together to develop the momentum in which comprehensive legislation is possible. And one thing I want to mention is, as much as possible, to couple mitigation with adaptation, because again, the adaptation is running in parallel with mitigation, and if there are ways in which they can be coupled together, then you're going to develop pretty quickly local interest in legislation that also has the broad mitigation challenge which is national and global. So those two things I wanted to make sure to mention. The last thing I do want to mention is also that the academy, universities, especially research universities, have more of an appetite than ever to contribute to the infrastructure for broad legislation. Our MIT Washington office is fully engaged. My Rapid Response Group, which is a group of 20 undergraduate and graduate students who've worked with a number of congressional offices, is at the ready to collaborate with anyone. So I'm offering that. I'm going to give over my time to others who have more experience in the legislative arena.
Thank you, John. That was great. So one of the questions, though, in this counting of policy, this is really the tricky part, like projecting the impacts of policy. If it's all funding and it's an open-ended, take the funding and do it if you feel like it type of thing, is that how do you count that? And isn't it going to be necessary to have mandates in these bills in order to calculate actual timeline greenhouse gas reductions? Certainly.
I'll give you one reference, I think maybe for your audience as well. If you're interested, go to En-ROADS. That's EN-ROADS, ROADS. It's a carbon accounting tool, and there's cost information embedded within that tool, and it relates closely to policy. It's basically an interactive tool that you can use to play out any number of scenarios, and you'll see that the 2-degree target is very difficult. The 1.5 degree target is near impossible. So I just want to offer that as a resource for everyone. It's, again, En-ROADS, developed by an MIT professor, John Sturman, and now hosted by Climate Interactive.
Thank you, John, for that. And that tool's great. And that's the kind of tool that we would love the scientists to actually use for the policy evaluation. So we can use it, our team is using it, but we're not really the authoritative source, are we? You guys, if you got together and had an advisory committee that said, okay, this package is going to do X, Y, Z, that would really be a powerhouse in the conversation. And now I need to move along a little bit faster. Sasha, you're up, and I know you get deep into strategy very quickly. So what's the infrastructure. How are all these groups connected, and how could we connect them better? It's a political science problem. It's an organizing the organizers problem. It's really not a policy or philosophy question. It's a very, it's like building the army. What's the game plan, the infrastructure? Go ahead.
Well, to try to be nuts and bolts, and be transparent about the view from our position in this big community, we try to provide the capacity for one of these coalitions, which is pushing for the bill that's going to stop commodities coming into the country that are a result of illegal deforestation. And just about everybody here from an NGO is on there, and it's extraordinary for us to see the time that is being committed by huge organizations to one of the specific initiatives here. Our success, I think, focusing on information is going to sink or swim on a lot, particularly the voices of indigenous people, let's say in the Amazon, describing the fires in the Amazon right now and how our consumption in the United States is responsible for that. The fact that we're going to be able to amplify those voices in the United States and hold specific companies to account and stuff, that's going to be what's going to make us successful or not. I know that we've got tons of capacity, tons of information that would be relevant for other initiatives that are going on there. And as Emily said, I think we should recognize here that you've put your finger on the need. I'm sure that a capacity of ours is going to waste for some key initiatives. And I would think that if a mechanism, if that's what you're pointing to, that there could be a mechanism that is above all these nests still, underpinned by the excellent science that are already on this panel, that is providing a really not dispassionate but passionate voice about how it's contributing to the overall goal. And I think we're united of 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, or we know what we want to get to, and ringing the alarm bell of how far we are away, or how close we are away, or what needs to be beefed up. I mean, I think we need the mechanism to be more efficiently generous with our time and our information with each other. Our intent is really there now. The energy is there, and I'm overwhelmed by it and incredibly excited about it. But I do know that some of that energy is going to waste because we could do better with the overarching organization.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Sasha. The capacity of this movement is vast. I've never seen anything like it. Every time I turn over another stone, there's another environmental group and 1,000 activists. So that capacity is not the problem. Having a plan and collecting that capacity so that we're all playing like an orchestra, that's the challenge. And that is a huge challenge. I'm not understating this. In Africa, the NGO community has a forum that takes place every 2 years before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And all the civil society shows up, and they have all the different working groups, and they come up with specific detailed proposals and policy suggestions for the African Commission. There are lots of models for civil society to come together in a more formal construct and regularly. I hear these tables convene quarterly. That scares me. When I heard the LGBT caucus wasn't having meetings, I had to sit in Representative Polis's office until they started hiring staff and meeting regularly. I'm like, our children are committing suicide and you're not meeting? I was shocked. And so having a regular meeting schedule, having the legislative directors meet once a month, figuring out how we're going to administratively weave ourselves together. Because I know that you all are working on different things that you would all want to work on together, and your audience is out there waiting for that post on social media, fight for this bill, fight for that bill, and they're not there that I'm aware of. And the social media campaigns are all about the problem, and news pieces, but it's not about the action campaign that all of you are doing together. Imagine what will happen if all of you sent out one post that said, call Senator McConnell tomorrow, you could drive him crazy. And that's what I was telling Schumer's office. If we had a collective bill, you're going to unleash the power of the grassroots. You will drive Congress crazy. And then you can just walk in, like this and say, this is what we'd want. Thank you very much. And you'll no longer be begging and asking. You'll have the weight of the world behind you and you'll get whatever you want. But we have to figure out what we want in order to make that happen. And manifestation is a function of clarity of intention. And that gets no clearer than when it's written in the four corners of a piece of legislation. And that's what I know activists in New York, we got arrested many times for the bill that the Working Families Party put together with New York Renews. That bill didn't pass and almost none of the provisions made it into the final bill, but it doesn't matter because they forced the issue and they needed the actual bill to do it. So the content it's not secondary. It has to be good and it should be scientifically based, but it's not the end game. It's the tool to build a mass movement. So I'm lobbying again / preaching. I think I'm even on a soapbox. And that was John that just spoke. Oh no, who was that just spoke? Sasha, I forgot. Who's next? I think Chad, you're next. Oh, who spoke last? I'm sorry.
I think I'm after Sasha.
So Chad, you're up.
So thanks, Todd. I can't really address exactly how we at Project Drawdown can solve this biggest challenge that everybody in the NGO community are facing, and how do we actually link arms and to collaborate and breaking down the silos. Part of it's our funding models. How do we actually work together with collective impact to achieve a collective impact? How do we agree on the common goal, naming the goal? We have to have a common agenda, right, in order to have collective impact. How do we share learning? How do we actually work together collaboratively? And there's a lot of things to address, and I can't really address it specifically, get into the nuts and bolts right now for that question, Todd, because I want to deviate a little bit and say that offer something that Project Drawdown is actually doing. So one of the things I think is really important is how do we bridge research, which is housed in the ivory towers of academia and peer-reviewed literature, and how do we take that really important information, data, and knowledge, bridge to action, right? And that's something that Project Drawdown is one of our bread and butter, is that we take the research, we aggregate it, we collect it, the world's brilliance, and we try to communicate it in ways that are useful and meaningful to decision makers. And underpinning all the work that we do is a integrated systems model that evaluates every technology or practice that we profile and draw down using thousands of data points collected from all over the world through a distributed network of researchers and contributors who have taken part in this project. And our models, our systems, I think, are the best in class system. They don't replace other really important models, Earth systems models, general equilibrium models, all these important stuff, but they act as a translator to be able to take that information and make it useful and meaningful to decision makers. The tool we have right now that we have available takes us about 6 months to run a full scenario. But for the last 2 years, we've been converting our entire system into a free and open source software platform, which we hope to launch the first prototype in January. And this tool is designed explicitly to take all of that work, to take that 6 months of analysis to a week or less, or even a day, to be a tool that could be played with, that could be used by researchers, decision makers, policymakers, investors. We're working with companies as part of our Drawdown Labs program, corporations from around the world, as partners, members, to bridge how do we create roadmaps of real existing solutions that are data-driven, scientifically based, so that corporations can change the way they do business internally, but also be accelerating solutions externally. We're working with policymakers in Europe and in the US. We're working with investors representing billions of dollars of capital. How do we create interfaces that are actually going to shift capital by identifying the real solutions, and that we don't have to do it? So we don't have to do it at Project Drawdown. We can have the world do it. We've launched Drawdown USA Research Association. We've launched Drawdown Europe Research Association. We're working to create Drawdown India, and so on and so forth. We need to create a distributed network that redefines knowledge systems that focusing on solutions that are data-driven. And stay tuned next year, because that's when the platform is going to be launched, and totally free and open source and transparent for all people.
Yay. Well, those are wonderful tools, Chad, but you're not off the hook. We're not going to just hand them, create the tools and hope. We need the scientists in our policy conversation, crafting this bill and looking at it and saying, this is how it's going to work or not work as well. But that's all exciting, of course. Kiran, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, one, I think, place we can start in terms of developing a good bill and support is perhaps to convene a climate congress with very broad representation, both in the environmental movement, but going much further to progressive movements across the country, bring folks together with express mission of developing and rallying around a benchmark bill. And that would allow the development of such a thing in a natural grassroots environment, rather than something that starts up high with the internal Democratic Party situation, which is always going to end up with a much more moderate bill. And then they're going to ask the grassroots to support the bill that they were involved in creating. And I think if you did this Congress, it would be transparent. Everyone would be there advocating for the positions. And I think that if we could pull that off and come out of it with a bill, that bill would have just tremendous moral weight and momentum going forward, because it wouldn't just be a benchmark of the science, it would also be a benchmark of what the progressive movement writ large wants and expects.
Hallelujah.
And so that's one idea I have of how to begin this. What to do afterwards, I'll leave to a later conversation.
Yes. No, we got to just get started somehow. That's brilliant. I love it. The XR folks are all excited about citizens assemblies. And I was talking to them, and this could be the organizational citizens assembly, essentially, where you bring the organizations together. I'll just note on the digest that we created, it's all y'all's ideas. It's none of our ideas, right? It's the experts. And we organized them under drawdown. So we took out the specific policy ideas and we made it so you could vote on each one of those ideas. So I forgot about this until just recently, as I was thinking about how do we embark on this conversation, and I'd be like, oh, well, we created this tool as well. If all of your organizations wanted to go look at that and then have your policy people go click on the ones that you like, then we'll open source the back end so you can see the results. And we would know, oh, these 500 groups all believe in the same thing here and here and here, and then there's differences of agreement here. That could be a pathway forward. I was thinking the other day, if everyone just gave us a memo with the first page, what you want in a comprehensive bill, the second is what you don't want, and that would give us the lay of the land too. And so there's lots of ways, if we had all your legislative directors together, that we could compile and open source, and keeping the community at large informed and soliciting their input. So there are many processes. To me, it's all about process. I was a lawyer in government for a long time, and so anyway, process is everything, and it does create the moral authority and it doesn't have to be exclusive. There could be multiple processes that interlink and that merge. All these coalitions could go through their own journeys, however they wanted to. We could have maybe a federation of coalitions. Who knows? All right, I'm doing the same thing. I got a warning from my husband that I was talking too long. Ramon, please.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd. And Todd, as Janet explained before, all our organizations, are connected through the different tables, and so there are these processes and priorities, etc. So it is better, of course, that if you join them and bring them campaign and communication skills and resources to communicate these priorities, that I think it's often where we have failed or cannot put a lot of, when you put many policy wonks to try to communicate things. It's a lot more challenging. But you know, that efforts are there, and definitely, you know, welcome. We don't need more studies. We have done that for a while. We need to communicate them to the general population, and that's going to be key. And the Sierra Club, you know, it's part of several of these tables. We're in the Blue-Green Alliance. We have invested, you know, time in the Equitable Just National Climate Platform that basically brings EJ leaders and mainstream national environmental groups together. And this is extremely important, you know, at least to try something different, because, you know, in the very few opportunities in the past when we were close to passing a federal bill, you know, Emily talked about the Waxman-Markey bill, and there was also the McCain-Lieberman 15 years ago or so, and one of the problems was that EJ and local organizations were not there because we were not there for them either, you know. I mean, and I'm talking we as the big environmental organizations, you know. In the example of McCain-Lieberman, that was based on market mechanisms and a cap and trade, that we rushed into it, you know, and asked for EJ leaders to, you know, for a leap of faith to support us on that. But then they know that, you know, if you go with just issuing licenses to pollute, the licenses will basically agglomerate in the most vulnerable communities. So what they gain with that, you know, nothing. More pollution for the benefit of wealthier communities. So those are the issues of systemic racism and deeming some people as disposable that we need to work around. And so we need to avoid that. I know there are groups that are going around, you know, with great policy solutions, with, you know, with support for big segments. But if you don't engage frontline communities and different EJ groups and constituencies, if you don't have Black, Brown, Indigenous people, we will not get there. So the difference that I'm seeing right now so far with the Biden-Harris transition team is that EJ leaders are being considered for top positions and as part of that. You know, when you have a Cecilia Martinez heading the Council for Environmental Quality transition team, is a good sign. So if we involve EJ and local organizations in frontline communities from the beginning, again, process, not only results, it might take longer, but the legislative battle might be easier, and the issues that Emily mentioned can be better overcome. So working with these leaders is going to be very, very necessary.
Yeah, it might take a year to come up with this bill, but that's all right. We have time with the Senate in flux, and it's not new. It's not exclusive to any other immediate organizing. I'm just, you know, put it out there. I wasn't going to make the suggestion, but comprehensive immigration reform is Joe Biden's top priority. If we want to build solidarity with front environmental justice communities, the climate movement could embrace comprehensive immigration reform legislation and make that a test case for how we could work together on an action plan like you do around the GOTV and really turn out activists to lobby for that bill. Then after that bill passes, that community will embrace the environmental movement's agenda, but the environmental movement still has to create clarity, legislative clarity as to what that agenda is. The immigration movement's not going to create that for us. So we have to do it ourselves, and then they will hop on that bandwagon as we have done theirs. And while you're at it, if you want to support the Equality Act in the Senate, that would be great too. So who's next? Felice, go ahead, Felice.
All right. I feel like there's like so much to talk about and so little time. So I'm going to just try to touch on a few things. One is I would actually argue we don't have a lot of time in terms of how Congress organizes itself. So you've got basically, you got next year coming, and then before you know it, everyone's going to be focusing on 2022. So the window actually is pretty narrow, but that doesn't mean that everything has to get done in the first year. What we think is really important is if there are bills moving, if there are opportunities to engage, to get down payments, political down payments, to get us down the path, we need to seize those. That's how we not just, it's not just how we build power, it's also how we demonstrate the power. So I think that, you know, if there are different ways that we can organize ourselves, I completely agree, Ramon and others have articulated this. We are part of all of these different tables, but if they're not providing enough of a window for other people to look in or to join, then that's something that we should think about. Now, if you are an organization, I see that there's 200 and nearly 300 people part of this this conversation. So I don't know if it's individuals who are part of organizations and organizations are plugging in, or if we're also trying to really create a space for individuals who are really impassioned and who want to get more involved. So I think I love the idea of a climate Congress. I do think that there has not been an opportunity to really just bring together everybody who cares about this issue and really see where there's a connectivity. So that's one thing. Second thing is, there is no one center of gravity anymore. So 10 years ago when Waxman Markey was moving, there was maybe like one, but now in some ways that's the strength of the movement, right? That's the strength, that's the power of the movement, but there is no one center of gravity. Now, is there an opportunity to kind of look a little bit higher up? I think when you and I spoke on the phone, I was thinking about, is there a coalition of coalitions that could be formed, a network of networks? That's a conversation that's actually happening with some of our colleagues here in Washington. Sierra Club has been part of those, as well as thinking about how do we create a more expansive table where we are really creating a network of networks, so that it's not just about the green groups here and the grassroots there and the labor groups here and justice groups there, but actually we do have really shared purpose and shared mission. Last thing I'll say is, we did this exercise. Sierra Club was a part of this, others as well. Right now, there's about 20 million unique members that we have, organizations. These are individuals across the country who are members of an environmental organization, who care about climate action. And 2021 is our opportunity to really demonstrate the power of that 20 million. And I would say, first step is, we talk a lot about engaging people on the advocacy cycle. There's all different components of the advocacy cycle, and the way that we demonstrate and build power is making sure that we're engaging in all parts. So that starts with voting. And after you vote and your member of Congress is now part of the incoming class, meet that member of Congress. Everybody can do that. Get to know that member of Congress, find out what they care about, bring the issues that you care about, and look for those opportunities to engage, because at the end of the day, every member of Congress is coming in 2021 with one thing in mind. They want to get reelected in 2 years, or they're thinking about how they can keep control of whatever chamber they're a part of. So it's just, I think it's helpful just to kind of make sure that it doesn't feel so amorphous engaging with the political process. And I think that there's a lot more that we can be doing to empower all of us to get to know our elected officials. Go meet with them early. And then when you're ready for an ask, go meet with them with the ask. And when they do the right thing, praise them. And when they don't, hold them accountable, and do it over and over and over and over again. And you know why? Because the opponents, those who are clinging to the status quo, are doing exactly that. They are not missing that opportunity. They're meeting with their elected officials right now. They've met with the people that are already going in. They're going in there with their platforms. They're talking about what their priorities are. So I think if there's more opportunities to plug people in, because we're not being as inclusive and as collaborative, or it seems still too mysterious, that's really good information to get for those of us who are trying to make it less mysterious. There's the Combined Defense Project, a great project that really was Mike Brune initiated that 4 years ago. It's got, it's a great networking opportunity. There's the U.S. Climate Action Network. That's another opportunity. So again, lots of different engagement tables or coalitions or networks. Much of it is digital right now, but it's at least a place where there's a sharing of information. Maybe it's not always the strategy. I think it's, last thing I'll say, and I know you're eager to kind of wrap up, but, just having watched kind of where we have drifted from over the last several years on trying to see where there's real agreement and where we can find unity. Sometimes we have a tendency to focus on the things that we don't agree on, and it splinters us prematurely. And I would say, we did this exercise. It's part of the reason why the 5 tables was formed, because there was a sense wow, we can't agree on anything. The climate movement can't agree on anything. And so the 5 tables came together. And the first thing we did is we looked at all of our respective platforms. the one that the Green New Deal Network wrote, the one that US CAN wrote, the BGA wrote, and lo and behold, what we found is actually we had more in common than we disagreed on. And so how do we actually focus on that and see if we can get some wins on those? And it's through that we then sort of build momentum and continue to build power, because that's really, at the end of the day, that's what we're missing. We're missing the demonstration of that political power in a really durable way.
That was beautiful, Felice. I don't know if we need to say anything else. I think that was a beautiful wrap up, frankly. It really was. Where do we go from here? I mean, it's 4:54, and if I had my druthers, we'd stay on the phone for another hour and figure this out, or at least figure out next steps. But my tech team says we have to take a break between these things, and so does my bladder. So we have to cut it, unfortunately, at a certain point. But you know, can we? I don't know if I should propose this or not. December 6th is a month from now. Can we mark on our calendar December 6th to reconvene with some legislative directors? We don't have to do it, you know, we're not going to organize any more symposiums for a minute. But anyway, just mark it down as a possible date, and let's just see. I'll write you again. I would love for us to have round 2 and for you all to tell me how round 2 should look like. And I really feel like if we could get the legislative directors together, that could be an interesting next step. January 6th, whatever I said. Is that January 6th? Let me look at the calendar. January 6th is a Wednesday.
You said December 6th.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, January 6th. Is that too soon? Or January 13th? Maybe it's a little more breathing room. Let's do January 13th. Just mark it down as a placeholder, if that's all right. And then, I don't know, can we do a fast 30 seconds? Last thoughts. Janet.
Yeah, excited to be working with everyone on this call and everyone who's in the audience. Super excited about finding out what the demand is. It's not the lowest common denominator, and we truly believe it's a combination of the investment we need and what we want to build, and the transition away from the things that are killing our communities. Thanks so much for having Greenpeace here.
Oh, we wouldn't do it without you. Emily.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Final thoughts are that we need to just emphasize that we need policy that reflects what's needed in order to protect our communities and the world. And so if we can come together and figure out what that is, I think we'll be in a good spot. And the only way to build the power to do that is by listening to the frontline communities, as well as all those most affected by fossil fuel extraction and climate change.
Thank you, Emily. I think you had an animal back there agreeing with you. John.
Well, again, thank you for including me and MIT. Just a quick point about, as I said before, there's enormous appetite for research universities, MIT in particular, to be engaged directly in ways that we haven't before. And at the end of the day, of course, there are many, many priorities. But one of the major ones is that we need to reduce carbon emissions by 7.6% per year and 50% on a decadal basis. That should be our target. And we are at the ready to help in that challenge.
Yahoo, I love hard numbers. Sasha.
Thank you. I really appreciate this effort to create an additional mechanism like some need for has been defined. I think I'm incredibly excited by the different voices here that are coalescing around the idea that we need the right information from frontline communities, both in the United States and abroad, to come to the fight and be connected really efficiently and urgently to the right policy initiatives wherever they are. And it's great that you're contributing to that.
Thank you, Sasha. Chad.
Well, thank you, Todd, and everybody for having Project Drawdown on here. And I would just say, I do think there's a tremendous amount of value in having a convening of a scientific advisory board to help really understand what are the real solutions, the real technologies and practices, and linking that to policy mechanisms so that we can have real substantive understanding of what these policies are. But it has to be interdisciplinary. not just climate scientists. We need one climate scientist. And then we also need to have sociologists. We need to have economists. We need to have technologists, people who come from a variety of disciplines coming together with scientific background to validate with real science, real data, what are the real solutions, and connecting those to those policy mechanisms. And I will, for my part, I'd be happy to participate.
Hallelujah. You think you can have that ready by January 13th? I'm just kidding.
Well, the only other thing I would say is you may consider instead meeting on January 9th at the National Council for Science and the Environment / Project Drawdown Conference, Research to Action, Science and Solutions for a Planet Under Pressure. And it's a 5-day amazing conference with leaders from all over the world coming and working on this. The 5th day, January 9th, is a call to action day where we have workshops from addressing all kinds of ways to participate and take real action, connecting science to action. And if you want to have a panel, I'm more than welcome to add you to the roster. There's lots of stuff happening.
We're happy to do, well, let's do one. You do great commercials, by the way, Chad. I love your commercials. January 13th at noon is for ours, though, if we manage to pull that together. Kieran, 30 seconds.
The Center for Biological Diversity is excited, committed. Want to move fast, get something big out there that's credible, exciting, something we can rally around, and let's roll. Let's do it.
Oh, I'm so happy. Ramon.
Okay, well, a lot has been said already, so I won't repeat. I would say, please, donate, write letters in Georgia. We need to focus on that one. I don't know if this is C3 or C4, but please go into Sierra Club Independent Action.org or many of the organizations that are active there. We need as many votes as possible. So that's very, very important. I'll focus on that, I guess, as my last statement.
That's a great thing to end with. And the same thing is true of all your C4s, by the way, that we're talking about on the C3 side. All your C4s could be organized collectively. I should be getting one email. I should be getting the same email about Georgia from everybody.
So January 13th might be better also because January 6th, we might not know yet what has happened. And that will define a lot in terms of legislative priorities.
Hallelujah.
Strategy.
And we'll be in a coma on January 6th, I'm sure, like we were on November 3rd or 4th, whatever. So good. 13th is better. Felice, you had a beautiful wrap up. I don't know if you can top that, but go ahead.
Well, I just want to say thank you for hosting this. It's been a great conversation. I'm really excited to see how many people have joined this. I'm eager to know kind of who's part of that community, and eager to figure out how to get to work and how to, again, harness all of this energy and excitement. We don't have a lot of time, so let's get moving and let's get trained up and get ready.
All right, I'll send you guys all the attendees list, the names and the groups for sure. And you can see I'm eager to look at it myself. I haven't had a chance yet. Well, I was after the gay rights movement and marriage equality, and we got my husband through immigration and got free. I thought I was done with movements until I read the websites and saw the urgency. And I panicked and I went into organizing mode, and I am just glad I did. And I'm grateful to all of you for everything you've done so far, and that's already there. The potential is unbelievable. And I'm grateful to be talking with all of you and for the opportunity to continue this. I'm feeling hopeful when I've been feeling very not hopeful. So thank you again for all of you, and to be continued, huh?
Great. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
all so
Good to be
much.
with you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you so much.
Rachel, could you give me hosting? Become the main host.
I believe I just did.